Cup qualifiers match day 2. Make sure to subscribe as we cover all the football happening here in Asia. We have a lot to talk about as the results are now finally in, and we're going to start with Indonesia, a country that has shown us a lot of support on the channel, so shout out to them. Let's talk about Indonesia and the result they got today at home, hosting Australia, ending 0-0.
And, you know, I will say, much like the game against Bahrain, Australia dominated this game, at least from a possession perspective. They dictated where the ball was going, how long they held on to it, and when Indonesia got on the ball, they honestly couldn't do much with it. You know, the offensive energy, that really fast counterattacking pace that we saw against Saudi Arabia was not here in Indonesia, unfortunately. But you know what was? Their defense. Once again, and we noted it in the last game for Indonesia, their defense truly has tightened up. Whether it's Idzes, Vrandrik as well, Martin Paes, they all really showed up. Risky Rido at the back, whether it's getting last-ditch defending stops or just really good shot blocking in general, they completely shut out Australia and limited them to very few genuine chances.
No, bro, let's remind the people, it was just a few months ago where we saw this same Australian team defeat Indonesia 4-0 in the round of 16. To get a 0-0 result the way they did today, I think is very, very impressive. And there's a lot to look at on both sides here, but let's just focus in on Indonesia. A big reason for why they got that clean sheet was Martin Paes.
Yeah.
Incredible performance. Once again, he had about 2-3 really good saves that they could have been goals, and he kept them from going in. And then, like you mentioned, last-ditch defending, just incredible effort all around. But I agree. I was a little disappointed in the lack of offensive threat that they had this game.
Yeah.
A big reason, though, was honestly looking at the Australian defense. I thought Harry Sutar was massive today, bro. Massive. And honestly might have been the player of the match for Australia because he stopped every single Indonesian attack.
There's two things going forward for the rest of the qualifiers that I'm going to be watching out based off of these last two matches, and especially based off of this one. It's going to be when they face against physical teams. So against Saudi Arabia, you can outpace them, and it was clearly seen in that game. Honestly, Indonesia could have scored 2 or 3 goals against them if they were just a little bit more clinical off the pass. But against a team like Australia, they're not going to be as naive to get beaten off the pace. They're going to have better positioning, especially with defenders like Sutar. Even in the midfield, you have really physical midfielders with Jackson Irvine, Keanu Bacchus. So I was really curious to see how Indonesia was going to handle it. And ultimately, they really couldn't handle it. Their offense got pretty much dominated. So I'm going to be looking for that in the future. How do they figure it out against very physical teams? The second thing I'm going to be looking out for is just their defense. I can't believe it's tightened up this quickly over the last 8 months. It's phenomenal. I mean, as you already pointed out, 4 goals they led in the last time I played Australia. But this time, honestly, the defense was just as good as Australia's. And I think that's a really big, important point to make, because that means they can go up against one of the best offenses in the region, at least one of the best teams in the region, and hold their own. So I think for Indonesia, yes, they weren't able to win at home, but the defense really proved the point that they can play now in these qualifiers.
Yeah, and when it comes to them getting on the ball, all I ask from Indonesia, especially when it comes to these type of matchups, is one, to learn to adjust to the opponent, because as you mentioned, you can't outrun these Australians. They're way too smart. They're able to body you. It showed today, but what I was hoping to see was Indonesia adapt and be a little bit more patient when they got the ball, instead of just wanting to go all out, full throttle, the way they did against Saudi Arabia. That's what I asked from them, is to be patient, pass the ball around, slow it down just a little bit, bro. I looked up how to say patience in Indonesian, so I can get my message across. I think it's kesabaran. Kesabaran, please. Take some patience, because I think that would actually help them a lot, because, dude, once again, in back-to-back games, they looked really tired by, like, the 70th, 80th minute, because they just try to put full energy on display. I think if they're patient, if they slow it down, it'll help the team, it'll help the energy levels, and in this sort of case, I think it would actually help them potentially score a goal against Australia, as they try to put more pressure on this Australian defense by possession instead of counterattacking.
It also is interesting how far Indonesia had to travel based off of the first game. I mean, they were in Saudi Arabia on Thursday. Cut to 4 days later, they had to travel over 1,000 miles to get to Indonesia. Pretty crazy. That's just Asian World Cup qualifiers in general. Japan had to do it. Saudi Arabia had to do it as well. Australia wasn't as aggressive, as they just had to go, a little bit northwest to get to Indonesia. But I do think, especially for a team like Indonesia that really relies on pace and energy, these travel distances might come into play in these World Cup qualifiers. So maybe get their points in those first match days, and the second match days maybe go for draws. I do think it's going to play a big factor.
I also think the Indonesian support that we saw was just as much as I would hope it to be.
Oh, yeah,
it was insane. The crowd was ridiculous. One of the best Asian atmospheres out there. I give them their credit for that. That was incredible to see them play at home. My question to you is this then. With 2 Indonesian games now in the books, what would you grade their overall window so far? What would you grade it? Based off what we saw against Saudi Arabia and against Australia, where does it land?
It's an A. Like, it's top notch, right under an A+. And the reason why giving it so high, even though they only have 2 points after it, is you have to consider Indonesia has never even gotten close to this point. And you start off against 2 continental giants in Saudi Arabia and Australia, and you're able to go toe-to-toe with them, almost beat Saudi Arabia, and get a very well-earned draw against Australia. I think for a nation that is as inexperienced as Indonesia, they pass with flying colors. These are 2 very positive performances. So I thought, honestly, that they were going to lose one of these games.
Yeah,
for me, the expectation was that they were going to drop even more points in this window. But instead, they played brilliant football against Saudi Arabia, and I really did think they earned the draw against Australia. Even though Australia played a little bit better, I think they deserved the point. So Indonesia going forward, I think, have proven to us and to the world, if they're watching, that they are going to fight, not just for a 3rd or 4th place position in their group, they're going to fight for that 2nd place spot underneath Japan.
And what about Australia? What about Australia?
Yeah.
With this, I would say, disappointing window so far and disappointing start to this stage. Yeah. There's a cause for concern here for Australians, for Graham Arnold, for the players. Not ideal, man. The performance that we saw from them over 2 matches. What grade does Altero give them?
No, I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed, dude. This is a C for Australia, man. 1 point out of 2 matches, and you're supposed to be, what, top 2 side in Asia? It's super disappointing. And yes, Bahrain played great. Indonesia played great against them, but you're Australia. You're supposed to dominate these matches. Maybe you get a little tripped up against Bahrain, but you got to fix it in this next match, and they couldn't. I will say Graham Arnold set out his team to be more offensive. We criticized them in that game against Bahrain that they're way too conservative. He did fix that. He started from the get-go, Iran Kunda and Samuel Silvera. I thought they were both very, very good, at least in shape and going forward. But one thing that became very apparent in this match, man, is Australia don't have any finishers. Oh, none.
That's exactly what I was noticing, is they lack that killer threat, that killer up top. I was thinking, imagine if international football was like club football and you could buy a player, right? What would the transfer value be on bringing back prime Tim Cahill? How much would they pay, bro?
Oh, yeah.
150 mil?
Exactly.
200 mil?
No.
That's the player that they need up top, and they have no semblance of that whatsoever, which is why we've seen 0 goals over 2 matches.
Yes, it's terrible. And then I also look at players like Matthew Leckie, who are so direct, so dangerous on the wing, and they just don't have it anymore. A really interesting player is Iran Kunda, right? He's signed with Bayern Munich right now. He's very young, but he's so raw. He's so raw. His talent needs to be honed in for many more years before he becomes an effective forward. And then you look at players like Mitchell Duke. I mean, let's be honest, he's never been, an exciting forward. He's a scrapper at best, and he's a good scrapper. Do not get me wrong, but if you need him to score a goal every other game, it's just not going to happen. So you already have your 2 forwards are ineffective. Craig Goodwin, it can be good, but he's just inconsistent. I thought he had the best chance of the match. Around the 30th minute, he was wide open on the left-hand side. He gets the ball, but his touches were ineffective. They were inefficient. He didn't set himself correctly, and he was forced to just shoot it straight at the keeper. But if he had gotten way more proactive touches, he would have had a free shot on goal, one-on-one with the goalkeeper. But he didn't, and that's going to be Australia going forward, man. Like, they're going to get really good positions. They're going to create a lot of chances, but I don't think they're going to have anybody to finish them.
And that's how the game ends, with Indonesia tying Australia 0-0. Let us know your thoughts down below in this match. We're going to continue on with Group C action. Let's go over to Bahrain, who hosted Japan.